Hello, friends, fans, and dairy products of all ages. This is Cheese of Ages here, making another video for the first time in a long while. And that's basically because until now I didn't have the means by which to record videos, both in technology and a living situation. But situations have at least somewhat changed, although I don't have a webcam anymore. But we're back, making fun of something stupid that was said on the internet about something I have a hobby interest in, which immediately spoils my opinions on the subject of today's video, which you can see in the title. Yes, something was stupidly said in those two videos, and we're going to address them in multiple videos because it just requires that much. The content of this video is going to be mostly about his first video, a particular claim that was made, because I need to isolate that second video into at least one other video, because there's just so much wrong with that freaking video. To the extent that there's not a single step in his example battle that is not privy to at least a minor, if not major, rules mistake. And that includes the character creation, because just on a core level, his example battle is a bad faith example. And also isn't even a bad faith example that's built how the example player wants it built. And also, he misquotes several rules, doesn't play the thing right in some of the steps of the sample battle because he's not getting the rules correct. And shortly after making fun of the rules system, does a turn that is not only incredibly poorly executed, pointless, and stupid, and half-assed, he outright, in this self-sabotaging turn, he makes up a rule that isn't actually a real rule, that makes it even worse, and presents it as if it were a real rule. So in other words, he outright lies about the rules in that example case. So yeah. The plethora of reasons that second video is a dumpster fire requires more space than I am willing to commit in this video, and I also need to talk about his first video, so it's just there's not enough room to address all I need to address about his videos. His first video made the claim that D&D 5e is somehow a role-playing system, but Pathfinder 2nd Edition is not. The claim was Pathfinder 2nd Edition is not a role-playing system. Don't play Pathfinder 2nd Edition if you want a role-playing system. Instead, if you want a system in which the players will open up the rule books, go directly to the Make an Impression action, say, I want to do Make an Impression, and then read the rules off, then Pathfinder 2nd Edition is the rule system for you. Even though the game mastering rules specifically tell you not to run it that way. Now, at the risk of him spending a large section of a response video yelling at me for claiming that he's doing something he claims he's doing, let me address this specifically. If he thinks that that's how you run actions in roleplay situations, no wonder he thinks Pathfinder 2nd Edition is not a role-playing game. It's because he's ruling roleplay out. In several places, in several rules and situations similar to this, the GM is instructed to, if a player just picks an action and doesn't provide any details or necessary roleplay, you are supposed to encourage them to roleplay. You're supposed to get more details. So in other words, the player doing that isn't a valid option unless the GM says so. And if that's how he claims the system is running, that means that's how he's running it, or he's exaggerating, which means he's presenting this argument in bad faith because it's not true. So, yeah. Let's go into how pervasively, beyond the fact that you're not supposed to do that, and the books tell you to not do that, how further invalid his claim that this interferes with roleplay. and this is not a role-playing system. Let's talk specifically about how diplomacy functions. You can pull this information up on the official Pathfinder 2e wiki at 2e.aonprd.com. It's the Archives of Nethys. You can go to the skills section, pop into diplomacy, and read along. Diplomacy charisma. You influence others through negotiation and flattery. The baseline core of diplomacy is based on manipulating attitudes. Explained right here at the top of the page. Changing attitudes. Your influence on NPCs is measured with a set of attitudes that reflect how they view your character. These are only a brief summary of a creature's disposition. The GM will supply additional nuance based on the history and beliefs of the characters you're interacting with, and their attitudes can change in accordance with the story. The attitudes are detailed on the conditions page and summarized here. And on this page, it breaks down pretty much all of the information for these conditions is right here, barring the fact that friendly can also theoretically give you a +2 to your social checks, helpful can give a +5, and the reverse is true of unfriendly and hostile. And that is something that the GM decides if the situation applies to. So let's go back up a little bit. The GM will supply additional nuance based on the history and beliefs of the characters you're interacting with, and their attitudes can change in accordance with the story. Roleplay is part of the story. So, essentially this means that things other than diplomacy checks can adjust the starting attitude of an NPC based on past interactions. Like, if you've interacted with this character before, even if you never made a diplomacy check, if the roleplay dictated that they would be more friendly towards you, they start friendly. And yes, this does in fact mean that make an impression is not the only means by which you can affect the attitudes of NPCs. So, why are we saying this skill is interfering with roleplay? And literally right here, it says, it explains, that starting attitude at the beginning of a social encounter can be affected by past interactions, even if you didn't make an impression. Now, what's make an impression? At least 1 minute of conversation during which you engage in characters. Basically, you use actions that are flavored to roleplay. Charismatic overtures, flattery, goodwill, negotiation, stuff like that. And then you make them temporarily agreeable. At the end of the conversation, attempt a diplomacy check against the will you see of one target, modified by any circumstances the GM sees fit, which includes their starting attitude. If the DM thinks that this particular situation warrants it. Good impressions or bad impressions on a critical failure last only for the current social interaction unless the GM says otherwise. And, oh no, complex rules behind it. Succeed, you improve by 1 step. So if they're indifferent, they're friendly. You got what you wanted, exactly verbatim. You succeeded on the objective of the action. Critical success, you succeeded especially. And like with most skills, these degrees of success and failure are basically outlining how this role would turn out in basically how you would rule it in any D20 system. If your GM's not saying, oh, you succeeded, so this person you're trying to make like you more has a slightly better attitude towards you. And if you're really big total based on role and role play bonuses, you may come like you a lot more. What DM's not ruling it this way? This is not anything rules intensive. This is just giving you clear outlines for things. Well, let's bump back up and go over the fact that this is temporary unless your GM decides otherwise. The GM would usually decide otherwise and make that long lasting effect based on roleplay. So, see the GM saying just taking the action is good enough to make this permanent, which is an optional rule, or your roleplay warrants long-term adjustments because it's something that would affect the story or history of the character, as outlined in the rules for changing attitudes. So, in other words, make an impression doesn't even last longer than a singular scene unless the GM says so, or roleplay is involved. So, up here with changing attitudes, it dictates that roleplay, not just make an impression, can in fact shift NPC moods verbatim, essentially. Make an impression's temporary, and to make it not temporary, the GM either has to make it where roleplay doesn't matter, or make it the decision based on your roleplay being good. So where's this not roleplaying here? Where's this? What about this diplomacy skill is making diplomacy counter to roleplay? Explain that to me. Where is it? It literally requires roleplay to function. Literally, in order to set the situation, the starting attitude, in order for the mechanics to start to function, roleplay is required. Literally, if this were blocking roleplay, it would stop working. Unless you're running the skill incorrectly. So maybe if Pathfinder's not a role-playing system, you should run it as one, as it's telling you to. Do I need to get closer to the mic to convince you of this? And is any of this I've disclosed to you seem particularly rules-intensive or complex? I mean, here's the auditory and concentrate and exploration and linguistics and mental trait tags, which you can, if you're on the wiki, you can click to determine what they mean. But auditory, basically, it's freaking auditory. It relies on sound. Linguistic, it means it relies on spoken languages and understanding each other. Mental, it means it can affect the target's mind. Concentrate means you can't do it when you can't concentrate. You know, exploration means it's not an action you take in combat. So complex. So complex. Oh, and yeah. This is like so rules intensive. And since we've got a little time in this video, let's talk about how another really poor example he throws out there. And he talks about, look at all these rules. There's so many rules. There's lots of rules for balancing on a log. Click over there to the acrobatics check for the balance. Balance. It's one action. A move type action, which means it sets off things like reactions that trigger on a move. Rules intensive. Requirements. It's basically explaining if you are walking on a narrow surface, uneven ground, or similar features. So that's pretty obvious if you're balancing. You're not going to balance on something you don't need to balance on. So you make an acrobatics check against the DC of the balance thing. And you're flat-footed while you're on a narrow surface or on uneven ground. If you succeed, you move at half speed, treating the terrain that's difficult to move on as difficult terrain. Which, you know, each 5 feet costs 10 feet of movement, and thus you're moving at half speed. Failure, you have to stop or you'll fall, wasting the action. So in other words, you don't get what you wanted. If you fail badly, you can't choose to stop, you fall off. There is additional rules based on this, where there's a grab and edge thing, which enables you to make a check to catch yourself. Now, on a critical success, you move up your speed, ignoring the difficult terrain of the freaking narrow area. Is this seeming super complex to you? If you succeed, you move across the balance thing, but it's difficult, so it's treated as difficult terrain. Okay, that's pretty clear. If you fail, you have to stop. You do not get what you wanted. You cannot move across the area, and if you continue trying, you will fall. If you fail particularly bad, you just straight fall. And if you succeed by a lot, you can ignore the movement restrictions on the balance because you did so well on the balance check. What's complicated about this? This is just being clear and concise with what success and failure means. I'll move slightly away from the microphone because I was creeping closer to it. But anyway. Oh, down here. Sample balance tasks. This might create some confusion because it's an extra list of things and it's not immediately available, but these are basically just to interact with the simple DCs chart on things. This just claim, okay, when you're using simple DCs, these are the things that fall under the individual difficulty ratings. This does not inherently mean you need to be having a master proficiency in acrobatics to walk on a tightrope. This is just meaning that somebody with master proficiency is required to do this consistently. And it might be unrealistic to try and do this if you're only trained. It's still possible to succeed, in theory, with different modifiers and stuff. There's nothing particularly complex about this. This is not a lot of rules. This is just how it's run mechanically and how to apply the math. It's not particularly complicated. Is this more complicated than D&D 5th edition? In some ways. I mean, wouldn't you kind of rule balance that way anyway? Where they move slower on a normal success but succeed. And if they don't succeed at the balance check, they stop but don't necessarily fall unless you're kind of a mean DM. But if they fail by a lot, they'll fall, and if they succeed by a lot, their progress is faster than it would be on a normal success. I mean, sure, not every table automatically rules in critical success and failure anyway, but I know most tables I've played at has always used critical success and failure. So, essentially, he's saying that there's a lot of rules for balance when all of the rules for balance exist in 5th edition. So, yeah. For all his protestations that the rules in Pathfinder 2nd edition are super complex, they're not. I mean, they can be worded in ways that make them sound a little confusing in some places, but once you pare it down, it's actually pretty simple. No joke. The only thing that is perhaps overly complicated, and yes, okay, I'm going to talk about this particular aspect of your first video that you didn't actually spend much time on, but saw fit to ridicule people for not talking about, though I won't go on the other points that combined with this you only really spent about 30 seconds talking about. I'm going to specifically talk about what the only overly complicated thing about Pathfinder 2nd edition really is, and that's the trait system. I'm only going to talk about it briefly, because it doesn't really require much talking about it. Conditions, there's a lot of them. They do specific things. They're complicated. They're hard to remember because there's a lot of them. Are they harder to remember than D&D 5th edition? Not really, but maybe in the sense that D&D 5th edition conditions pretty much all do the same thing with some niche cases, and there's fewer of them. But you'll still need to reference what the conditions do unless you memorize them, which you will have a harder time doing if it's not your main game. With both systems, but more so Pathfinder 2nd edition, you could just go to the wiki and click something at the sidebar called conditions, and it'll take you to a list of the conditions. Oh no, I need conditions cards, and I don't have them. Oh wait, I have a phone. I'll literally go up, take my phone out of sleep mode because I had the freaking conditions page up on my phone already because I knew I'd need them. Or if I didn't, I simply go to the wiki by entering it into the browser. Don't even need to type it out if I've been there before. And then I click one thing in the sidebar that says conditions, and boom, there it is. So complicated, so hard. You really need to memorize those. You can't just take 2 seconds looking them up. You need to make condition cards. You can't pull out your goddamn phone as the DM. God forbid you actually use modern technology. You know, super complicated. Now, some of these conditions have lots of little bells and whistles to them. For like prone, it like makes you flat-footed, which is negative to your defenses, and standing up from prone to get rid of this penalty provokes an attack of opportunity if the person has an attack of opportunity. And also, forgot to mention that being prone also gives a -2 to melee attack rolls. Oh, and there's also an aspect where a person that's prone can take cover from ranged attacks. Hey, that is complicated, and not all of those are actually detailed on the conditions page, so you do have a point. It's a little bit of a problem. Is it an incredibly, huge problem that makes the game unplayable like you claim it is? Like, if the game is unplayable unless for some reason you have condition cards? No. Will you make small rules mistakes? Because you don't remember the side rules that prone that does the thing where you can take cover while prone? Because it's not on the page? Maybe. But yeah. Boo-hoo. Cry me a river. You have to pull out your phone and click 2 buttons. Woo. I mean, if you're using D&D Beyond, you gotta go through a freaking maze to find what conditions do in that, or hyperlink, and traits, little sub-things, and monster entries, or abilities where it says where I went over through earlier, where it has mental or auditory. On the wiki, you could just click the freaking box, although it is a somewhat of an issue to gate entry if you don't use the wiki, which is free and officially endorsed. Because you can't click a box on a page and then automatically go to where that is. You need to go to the index and look at where that is and go to that page. It's admittedly a minor gating issue that is relatively minor if you use the resources available. So if you use D&D Beyond to help with your freaking GMing or playing, we have a wiki, and we have a freaking version of a character builder. Both of those are free. We don't even need to buy any of our books. So, hey, woo. D&D makes you buy the freaking books in the D&D Beyond even if you've bought them already. Meanwhile, Paizo gives you the books for free. You don't need to buy them at all. You can just take out your phone and have them for free. They support it. They say, hey, go ahead, yay. So, yeah. Traits. Let's talk about weapon traits. Those are a little complicated, clearly demonstrated by the fact that he ignores one in his sample battle, and that's the longbow having the volley property. That's problematic, and you'll forget them even if you write them down on your sheet. But the thing is, everyone in every edition forgets things they write on the sheet. I'm not saying that weapon traits aren't more complicated than they need to be, but I'm just saying it's not a game-breaking thing like you're making it out to be. Unless, of course, you start making fun of the system and saying your math is flawless even though you're not applying all of it, then I'm going to make fun of your freaking misuse of weapon traits. But let it be said, I did point out the detail where weapon traits being how they are caused him to make a mistake in his sample battle, and I will probably acknowledge it in the video for that. Let that be clearly stated. I made that point already, even though he did not make it himself, and hasn't made any replies to comments to that effect, defending that and using it as a point. Like a lot of things, they could have made points to reinforce his arguments in his example, but through a combination of not doing it right, which would lead to that, he just doesn't plain make them. So yeah, I'm a little irritated about that example battle, because of plethoras of rules mistakes, making up rules, making fun of people, But we'll go into that in another video. This one's already been rambling on for 23 goddamn minutes, giving you an indication of why I separated them. So for the time being, my point has been made that freaking Pathfinder 2nd Edition isn't game-breakingly complicated or rules-intensive, and nothing about it blocks roleplay if you actually use the rules how you're told to use them, and how not only does Make an Impression not interfere with roleplay, it doesn't function without it. So, we'll get to the sample battle in another video, but for now I've got to roll. Oh, wait a second. That's actually a good outro. I mean, probably hundreds of people use it because it's a pun about having to leave and rolling dice, but I might as well use it. Oh well, there we go. The outro finally figured out after 10 years on YouTube. So, bye, I guess.